Hello and welcome to this series of interviews ahead of NoVacancy Hotel and Accommodation Industry Expo London. I'm Dan Assor, the event director of NoVacancy, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Simon McGuire, co-founder of Rockingham Partners. How are you doing, Simon?
I'm really good, thanks, Dan. Nice Monday morning.
Nice to see you. Yep.
Yeah.
Simon, before we get into talking about how you work with hotels and some of the challenges they're currently facing, can you just tell us, for those that aren't aware, a little bit about Rockingham Partners and why you decided to set up the business, please?
Yeah, of course. So me and my co-founder, Mike Lashmar, we've had a background, a long background in independent hospitality, working for various brands over the years. And I think probably we felt that, times have never been tougher for independents. A lot of the big boys out there can kind of leverage themselves really well, and for independents it's much tougher to do that. So we hoped that bringing our expertise to the table would help put independents on a slightly more level playing field, and that's really what we focus on is helping independents kind of find hidden value that they might not know about in their asset.
Thank you. And we're going to talk about a few ways that you help independents. And one thing which I guess is always on people's minds, I guess whether in a good or a weak market, is cost control. It's always a hot topic. Might seem an obvious question, but why is it so important for operators to regularly review their cost base, rather than sort of perhaps only reacting when times get a bit tougher?
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head that it does sound a bit obvious, but so often, the simple things and the obvious things are sometimes the things we forget, or we it's an easy one to kind of push down the line. I'll have a look at that a bit later. And I think, there are any cost base of any hotel has multiple layers to it. And, whether it's through advances in technology, whether in menu engineering, there are always several layers, several angles that hotels can relook again at their cost base. And we've been working, times are particularly tough, post April and the NI increase. That's had a huge whack on so many independent hotels. I was chatting to someone the other day, nearly 200K added to their wage bill alone. And that's, taken a lot of hotels from perhaps, being profitable to now losing money. And I think re-reviewing your cost base, identifying, maybe there's things that we often see, people who are signed up to multiple technologies that actually do the same thing, and perhaps they've just kind of got into a rhythm of paying that bill and not really analysing if anybody in their team is using it. So, a fresh perspective on that is really important. Also, some companies add in extra services that perhaps weren't there at the beginning of their contract, and now they realise, oh, actually, we could use that company to do that, and we don't need to pay double bubble because actually that's being covered. And with any contract, suppliers, incrementally, put up the charges each year to cover their costs, as most businesses would do. And actually going back and seeing if there's a different operator or a different supplier who might be a bit smaller, who might have adopted some new technologies to keep their cost base down, often leads to a great discount there. And furthermore, when it comes to things like food purchasing, we're seeing more and more opportunities for independents to become part of something a bit bigger in terms of purchasing power, and gain benefits through that. One client we worked with just a couple of months ago, the 25 items they had, their top spend from a food perspective, saved them nearly 30% on that in terms of just signing up to something with a bit more purchasing power. And I think just reviewing that, setting a discipline of reviewing that every 6 months and going through all those lines, having a call with your current supplier, having a benchmarking with 2 or 3 other suppliers, is a really good discipline to get into. And we've seen some pretty big results from customers doing that.
Sure. Thank you. Makes sense. I mean, I guess you can apply that to individual households, right? I mean, it's just about being disciplined in your approach, and, all these little micropayments to different tech providers or suppliers, as you say, also add up. And I guess it's also about, especially for a small independent hotel, cash flow management, because I guess P&L is one thing, but it's also cash flow. And I guess talking to suppliers there, maybe renegotiating some terms, understanding how you're getting paid from certain people. Do you talk to customers at your hotels around about cash flow issues as well?
Yeah, and look, it's a major issue for so many. And I think one thing we've kind of noted, particularly in the independent sector, there are some amazing suppliers out there. I think we've got to, we don't always give credit to suppliers, but there are some amazing suppliers out there who, when hotels are in trouble, they join the fight and stretch their terms and whatnot. And one thing I guess I've kind of learned over the last 2 or 3 years, when a lot of the work that Rockingham do is going into businesses that might be in trouble. Not always. Different groups that we work with have different challenges, but cash flow is something that we have been involved in. And I think, having an open dialogue with those suppliers, not hiding away from the difficult conversations, keeping them up to date, is definitely the way forward. The minute you stop talking to suppliers, the minute you stop telling them where you are and being transparent with them, is the minute they start to panic, and rightly so. It's their livelihoods, it's their business as well. So, we're always keen to make sure we keep that dialogue going, and that has paid huge dividends in terms of that.
And I guess what you don't want to do is cut costs and change and reduce the overall guest experience, right? So there is a balance to be had. How do you advise hotels that you work with to look at their cost base whilst protecting the guest experience, which ultimately drives revenue?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question, Dan, and I think there's a couple of ways of looking at when you're looking at your cost base. The first is, are you changing for something that's like for like? If you're changing for something that's like to like, well, there's not really an argument to be had there in terms of guest experience. We're changing from baked beans to baked beans. It's just a different supplier, and the guest isn't really going to see an impact. I think where, I suppose, from a cost base point of view, whether it's, I think a really good example of that, and seeing it across the industry, is this notion of not having your room cleaned the day after you arrive. So, and I've seen all sorts of variations of this. And I think it's about, again, being transparent in your communication with the customer. So we went and reviewed a hotel last week, and they had a really nice sign as you walked into the room. They were quite transparent about it, like costs are tight, or things like that. But we want to reward you if you don't have your room service tomorrow, and take this token and claim £5 at the bar. So, for me as a customer walking into that room, I kind of felt, look, that's totally transparent what they're trying to do here. They're not cutting from the customer, or they're giving the customer the option. And I think so many people would kind of take that, and actually I talked to them, there was something like a 60% uptake on that token. That £5 pint probably cost them, let's say, £1. And normally they'll probably get 2 or 3 out of that, because they're starting the person drinking in the bar. They'll build up a rapport with them. Sure. So, it's a really clever way of doing it without cutting from the customer experience whilst reducing the cost base. And I think that is what times like this challenge us as hoteliers to do. It challenges us to say, we've always done this. This has always been the norm. But how can we, in this time of real difficulty, how can we adapt to be a bit more streamlined without, challenging that customer experience?
Sure. And I know you work alongside management teams, and having a look at your website and some of your posts on LinkedIn, you talk about yield and guest experience together. Beyond RevPAR, what other metrics do you sort of look at to understand performance?
So I think, there is so much data available to us these days, and revenue management for me, oh goodness, I remember kind of starting in the industry. It's gone from something that was a bit mystical at first, to now being, more scientific, I think, than finding the cure for COVID. It feels like, Boris Johnson almost needs to stand up and give an explanation about it. It's become super scientific, and that can be a bit daunting for a lot of people. Owners in particular, they might come from a different background completely, and actually, there's so many metrics around, and I think sometimes stripping it back to the very basics is a really good way to look at your business. Really just challenging yourself on your EBITDA versus last year, challenging yourself on your percentage cost basis, whether it's marketing, whether it's payroll, and challenging yourself on your customer feedback, and again, keeping that as simple as possible in terms of metrics, but looking at that feedback from the customer. What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? And if you've got your cost bases broadly in line, you're giving a good customer experience, and you've got your channels open, and you're kind of reviewing your pricing in line with your competition. I think there can be a danger of over complicating
Sure.
something. It was interesting. I was speaking to someone the other day, and they weren't a hotelier. They were from a completely different background, and they just bought a hotel. And I remember them saying to me, how hard can it be? It's in a way, it kind of sometimes it felt a bit patronizing, but if you actually break it down, back to its simple format, sometimes that can be a bit of an easier way to review your business than over complicating all the metrics that are out there.
Sure. Thank you. And obviously change is never easy, both for the leader that's having to implement the change and the teams that are having to react to it. And I know you yourself do a lot of talks and work around leadership. How do you help motivate teams and their leaders to embrace change, especially when there might be some resistance at first?
Yeah. Thanks for that one, Dan. So I guess the first thing to understand is probably the change curve, and it's something we see every day. Someone the other day was just telling me about it, actually. And the change curve is that first kind of we find out the news, and it's that dramatic feeling. Then it's, what does it mean for me? And then it's after whether it's a few hours or a few weeks, it's how can I get on board with this? And I think understanding that change curve is quite important in any conversation. That certainly in the first instance, people might be a bit shocked, or they might be slightly taken back, and that's a natural first reaction. It's then about being clear with your communication about why you're doing it, about asking them their views on the change, and is there anything that perhaps hasn't been taken into consideration so that they feel part of the process. And actually you get so much value from people at that time, because they do look at it from a perspective that perhaps you haven't considered. So I think it's about taking people through that process. And ultimately, if any individual knows what the outcome is that you're looking for as a management team, or then the reasons for the change should be clear. So, if it's a cost element, then the team should know that it's because we're trying to, whether it's recoup some of the losses from the national insurance, or, if it's improving the guest experience, and that's, one of the aims, which it always should be, then that change again should be fairly clear. But I think understanding that there is a curve for people to go through, that sometimes their initial reaction won't last, and that, drawing in at that point any viewpoints or observations that they make can be really beneficial to your long-term decision, or changing your decision if it isn't quite right.
Sure. And do you think operators and leaders sometimes, and give us an example, maybe wait too long before they ask for help?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I think we're all quite proud people. That's tends to be how we are. Often when it comes to whether it's hoteliers, owners, we're quite a lot of people are successful in their own right, or successful in other businesses, and don't always feel that there's a way out, or feel that there's an answer that they're maybe not just quite seeing. And I think, believe it or not, I was pretty anti-consultant back in my day, when I was a MD of a hotel group. I was like, these consultants can't tell me anything. But having seen it now in with what we do, I think the owners that we kind of work best with are the owners that are humble and understand that actually another point of view could be really beneficial, another angle to look at things. And I think it's those owners who are willing to kind of move forward with the times and change with the times that ultimately get the best results. And that doesn't mean that a consultant's advice will always be taken, but it does freshen up the perspective that there are maybe 2 or 3 ways to go. And a really good example of that is, I guess I've been working with a company that is in the budget sector, but their mantra is anything but budget. And we've been kind of really exploring how we can improve the quality, whether it's the food offering, whether it's the arrival. And just because I think it was a really good sort of angle from the owner to think, how can we stand out in the budget market, is actually perhaps we can just be the best budget hotel there is, so that actually customers who are looking for value get the value, not just from the price point, but also the value. And the ratings on booking.com and tripadvisor.com really stand out compared to the other budget hotels in their sector, and they're getting great results from that. So I think it's that ability to just look at it from a different angle, and is really important.
You mentioned that hoteliers can end up spending a lot of money on tech they don't necessarily use. And there's a proliferation of tech platforms in the market just now, and it has been for the last probably 5-10 years. What's the best piece of advice you'll give to an independent operator when they're looking to assess what they need from a tech stack perspective?
Yeah, so that was never a conversation 10 years ago. And now it's one of the biggest conversations going. So, and I think we can all agree, whether it's our day-to-day life or our work life, that we get wrapped up in, fancy languages and products that can do X, Y, and Z. The problem is they can't do X, Y, and Z if we haven't thought about how they're going to land, if we haven't thought about the framework that they sit in, all of those things. So I think before introducing any new piece of tech that comes on the market, I think a really good discipline to get into is take a step back, review all of the tech that you currently have and what it's providing and what it's doing, whether it's working together, and what is adding in this new piece of tech actually going to give. Is it going to replace something else? Is it going to is it just more statistics that look fancy to start with, or is it actually delivering some value? And I had that recently with a new hotel group that I've been working with across Europe, and it's been a real struggle because perhaps some of those items weren't thought about clearly at the start, and now they're actually starting to remove some of the tech that they spent a fair bit of money on bringing in. So I think taking a step back first, really thinking about, again, the customer journey and the employee journey, because ultimately, if you're bringing in the tech, you want to know that your employees are actually going to use it. And so often we kind of make these decisions from a really high level, and we don't think about the teams on the ground, if they've actually got the time or the knowledge to use that tech.
Sure. And just looking to the future, how do you see the outlook for independence specifically over the next couple of years?
Oof, tough. Really tough. I think, I think we're going to see a challenging winter. I think from what we're kind of hearing and seeing, there's hotels that are in a tricky position when it comes to whether it's refinancing or, looking whether they can, cash flow issues and so on. So I think we might see a few casualties, in all honesty, not just in hotels, but the restaurant sector as well. We do a bit of work on that side, and I think we're going to see a few casualties this winter. I think if you can, adapt your cost base, I think if you can continue to offer something great for clients, and you can ride out perhaps the storm of the next 12 to 18 months, and there's probably going to be a decrease in the amount of competition out there over the next couple of years. I think there's a real opportunity to come out the other side in a really strong position, because you've done the hard work, you've really looked at your cost base, you've really looked at the value you offer, and then I think there can be a real, if the world's cycles that have been happening for the last few hundred years are anything to go by, there'll be an uptick, I'm sure, at some point. And so maybe riding through the storm a little bit by kind of really reviewing everything that you do will be a big benefit come a couple of years' time.
I guess one of the byproducts of what you said is that there'll probably be some more natural consolidation in the market, I guess. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. So I think, from a buying and selling perspective of hotels, I think that has picked up. I've seen a lot of activity in the last 6 months. So I think there are a lot of people out there who are starting to think about, we're going to come out of this in the not too distant future, and if they've got a great product, increasing the number of assets that they have ready for that uptick is on a lot of people's minds.
Because I know Rockingham have a finance division. What are you seeing when it comes to raising capital or debt restructuring at the moment? Is there money out there for the right asset?
Yeah, I think so. It's tough, and I don't think the government probably have done us too many favors in hospitality, but likewise, I don't think they've been in the easiest position either. So I think it's very easy to sit there and kind of blame the market. The really difficult thing to do is to say, yes, it is a tough market, but what are the opportunities? And kind of rise above that. And I think if you can put a compelling offering together and a compelling product, then there are people that are going to back that, but they're perhaps a little bit more cautious than they were before.
Sure. And if someone came to you today saying they wanted to open their first hotel, what's the one piece of advice you would give them?
Yeah, well, I had that exact conversation on what day was it? Was it Friday? I had that exact conversation on Friday morning. Someone who'd just bought a property and wanted to turn it into a restaurant with rooms, an exciting project. And I think the advice that I shared with them is the same thing I'd say here. I think that's a golden opportunity when you're starting something new to really think about the operational setup of that hotel in terms of, we know that the wage costs are only going to go one way. We know that that's the biggest cost base for pretty much everyone out there. So having that opportunity to completely rethink your model, whether it's chefs, whether it's how many waiting staff, how breakfast is set up, how dinner is done, how check-in is done, rethinking all of that, being really forward thinking about it is going to set you up absolutely brilliantly for the future. So that would be the one piece of advice I would give, is really think through your customer's operational journey, and how you can streamline that as much as possible. And there is so much tech out there now to make that journey so streamlined. It's incredible. So being an early adopter of that is really beneficial.
Sure. And I guess one of my final questions would be, what do you love about working with hospitality businesses?
Yeah, for me, it is, and it always has been, the people element. That's why this industry is great, and we benefit from that so much more than other industries, whether it's guests, people we work with, owners. So it has to be the people element, but within that, it's what I love about the opportunities we get with Rockingham is we get to work with a lot of teams, and sometimes we get to show them an angle that they haven't seen before, and seeing them grasp that or learn that and taking that on and improving the product that they have, or improving the bottom line that they have. That's where we get real satisfaction, of a job well done.
Simon, I know yourself and your business partner, Mike, are going to be at NoVacancy in February. Give us a sense of why you think events like this and why NoVacancy specifically is important for yourself and, I guess, the hospitality industry.
Yeah, so first of all, we're really excited. We've heard really good things from some colleagues who have been to the event out in Australia. And so we're excited. And as soon as we saw this was coming to the UK, we signed up. I think one thing kind of we're excited about, being a startup or 2 years in, was this opportunity to be in the kind of startup section and be in a similar place to a lot of other companies and whatnot. So it's a great entry level for us as a new business. And the reason I think going to these types of events is so important, that networking element, having interesting conversations with people, hearing how other people are doing it, is so powerful. And it's again about taking that step back and just re-reviewing what you're doing, and you can have some brilliant conversations at events like this. So that's why I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Simon. We look forward to seeing you at the event. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Dan.